Sure. Well, I think there are a couple of things that we learned in Michigan that can be shared and have been shared with other regional associations of grant makers and other part of the philanthropic infrastructure. I think the first thing we learned was that we were stronger collectively than we were individually, that there was benefit by really pulling together and pooling our resources to partner with government. I think that was the first thing. I think the second thing was that we realized that we had to treat government not as an adversary, because it would have been easy when, the Tax Act happened in 1969, and some people look at the government climate right now and say, how can you work with government? And my response is that we've learned over the years that government is an extremely important partner, and that it's much better for us to be at the table with government than to be on the menu for government, So that's kind of the second key, I think, issue that we've learned, is that government is an important partner. I think the third key issue is we've also learned that we've got to be incredibly patient. This is it's time consuming. It doesn't provide you with, an immediate benefit necessarily, and you've just got to stay the course. And so if you look at some of our most successful partnerships with government, and particularly in terms of public policy over the years, it's really happened because we've been willing to hang in there, watch leadership in government in some cases change, and you think, okay, you have a new party, a new governor, what do you do now? But we've been willing to stay the course. So I think the third piece has really been, we've got to be patient, and we've got to, the fourth point is, we've got to assume that repetition is okay. Some of us, and I'm guilty of this, I automatically assume that, these people have been elected to public office, they automatically know what philanthropy is and what foundations are. No. You have to start from scratch, and so there's nothing wrong with being repetitive. You just learn that you can say in a variety of ways, And so I think that would be the fourth point that I would share. I can go on. I think the fifth point that I would share about what I've learned since the Tax Act through being appointed CEO is that there's a place at the table for all types of foundations. It's important if we're going to be successful. And I know that in the past there has been, the tension was, CMF is driven by the three major foundations in Michigan, and the rest of us really don't matter because the three big foundations can easily swallow us all up. But it's all about relationships, and sometimes that small family foundation that has a relationship with a local legislator or a cabinet official is incredibly critical to making a major collaboration work. And also, we can tell more stories as we go. Well, I think one of the things that makes us unique is that CMF just held its, believe it or not, its 32nd annual trip to Washington for philanthropy. There's no other regional association in the US that's been doing it for 32 years. And some people would say, Rob, you're still talking about the same issues you were talking about when you started it 18 years ago, let alone 32 years ago. And some of the issues don't change, because why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this to really make sure that that unique spirit of giving that's part of the American way of life, that's part of our culture in the US, doesn't get lost and doesn't get taken for granted. So the first thing we did was we realized we needed to make sure every year that we're there, telling the story of philanthropy and the impact that organized philanthropy, that foundations are having, whatever type of foundation it is, in the districts of members of Congress as well as statewide for the senators. And the neat thing about it is they now look forward to seeing us. I mean, they expect us to come. If we're not coming, they would want to know what's going on, And they really appreciate the fact that we are partnering with government. So the first part of our public policy work was really very much oriented towards defensiveness. How do we protect philanthropy? How do we make sure that Congress doesn't pass laws that puts philanthropy out of business? The second part of our public policy, which we really learned and grew into as we learned from these experiences, was the whole aspect of how do we partner with government around policy issues? And we realized that, there used to be that belief that, well, foundation is the venture capitalist, we get something started, then we can turn it over to government, and they'll take it on and continue it and make it flourish and take it to scale. It doesn't work that way. So we realized that we really had to, if we were going to leverage philanthropy in all of its finest ways, and not just money, use the knowledge, the convening power of philanthropy strategically, we really realized that we had to expand our public policy work beyond government relations and the regulatory issues, and really look at key ways in which philanthropy in Michigan could be a partner with local government, state government, and the federal government. And not every partnership has been successful, but the good news is that we've had some really major successes along the way. And people, look at us and say, it must take an incredible amount of effort to do what you do. Well, there are ways in which you can design this so that it doesn't really require that much effort. We have a lobbyist on retainer in Lansing, and people say, well, isn't that incredibly expensive? And I say, it costs us $25,000 a year. It's not really that expensive, and if you look at the return on the investment, that $25,000 for us produces, over the last 4 years, it produced about $100 million in partnerships that were well worth that that $25,000 a year. Strategically, that's very important. 20 years ago, CMF, as you know, we were all involved in the decision to create an umbrella organization for the nonprofit sector in Michigan. And at one point, we looked at, should CMF just become the umbrella organization? We realized that that probably was not appropriate, that it would be best to have a separate entity. And so we all were involved in the creation of the Michigan Nonprofit Association. And CMF, as one of the founders, has a seat at the table. We're one of the board seats on the M&A board, and I chair the Public Policy Committee, so we're very much involved. And the interesting thing about it is that we realized, and I think I'll just make 3 points here. One is that it was in philanthropy's best interest to have an umbrella organization and to also have an umbrella organization that could promote a strong nonprofit sector. That we had, it's one thing for us to all be worried about our grantees, but if we're not worried about the sector that they're all part of, our efforts can become pretty futile, to put it mildly. So we decided that we needed to partner with M&A and we needed to have a strong nonprofit sector. And we've really designed 3 important pieces of infrastructure in this state. And we realized that we really needed to be partners with government, each branch of government at the state level. So let's just talk about the first one briefly, and that is the Office of the Attorney General. Some people would say, well, why would you partner with your regulator? Because the Office of the Attorney General is responsible. They have a charitable trust section. They're responsible for watching over us. Well, we realized that if we didn't be proactive and have a council that could meet with the Office of the Attorney General on a regular basis, that we might fall prey to regulatory activity that would not be mean-spirited, but which would be really uninformed. So the good news is, by having this nonprofit council to the Office of the Attorney General, and it's, the Attorney General was very receptive to the idea and said, this is not a bad idea for us to do this. At that time, it was Governor Granholm, and she did, quickly say, and you do realize that I can still do whatever I want as the Attorney General. And we said, of course, Attorney General Granholm. But Attorney General Cox really bought into the idea, and of course, Attorney General Schuette has continued it on. So the first part of our infrastructure was having a counsel to the Office of the Attorney General. And the good news about it is we've been able to do some things together which individually we couldn't have accomplished. So we have a website which is, it's all about operating legally and making sure nonprofits know how to operate and follow both the federal and the state laws. And it's a very simple tool, but they can give it a lot more visibility because of their state presence than we could if M&A or CMF were doing it alone. The second thing is, as we all know, giving is really, while foundations are important and corporations are important, individual giving is the mainstay of charitable giving in the US. And so we need to make sure that we're helpful to the individual givers. So together, CMF, M&A, and the Office of the Attorney General promote giving wisely every holiday season. So that's been the first piece, is how do we really have a positive relationship with our regulators, and they can still come out and say, you know, we really aren't going to agree with you on this. And there have been some bills where they've said, you know, we're not going to be able to support the nonprofit sector on this by virtue of our other responsibilities. The second thing we realized we really needed to do was we needed to work closer with the executive branch of government. And so Michigan created, and it was really modeled after a pilot that was done when Dennis Archer was mayor of Detroit. And we really created the Office of the Foundation Liaison. And it's unique in the country. It's the only gubernatorial office like this in the 50 states. There are a number of mayors who now have picked up on it and who have similar offices. And it's been a very important activity. And you can imagine the first year it was in place, and Governor Granholm welcomed it with open arms, but the first year it was in place, we had to spend most of our time explaining that we were not a fundraising arm for the governor, that was not the deal, you know, for the Office of Foundation Liaison. But we were very fortunate to find an individual who had both government experience, state government experience in the state Office of Management and Budget, which was very important, as well as foundation experience. So Karen Algergisen, who's been leading that office, had just the perfect blend of experience for us. And it's turned into a very positive activity for both the foundation community and the government. The important point I'll just make there is that M&A is at the table because the office has an advisory committee, and Kyle Caldwell, the president of the Michigan Nonprofit Association, is on that advisory committee. So when we meet with the governor quarterly, he's always there with us. So while it's called the Office of the Foundation Liaison, we're very much concerned about the whole nonprofit sector. And then the third piece of infrastructure, which is, I believe there are now 2 states in the country that have this, and that is a nonprofit caucus to the legislature. One of the challenges in Michigan is we have term limits. There are 22 states that have term limits. And as you know, it's a revolving door. No sooner do you think you've got an educator, legislator educated, familiar with how foundations work, then they're gone and you start over again. And it can be a challenge when one of your members calls up and informs you that, I just want you to know, Rob, my pool boy just got elected to the state house, and he's 22. And I said, great, have you filled him in on the work of your foundation? Oh, never talked to him about philanthropy before, you know. So part of the challenge is, how do we really help these new legislators learn fast about the nonprofit sector? And there are 2 things we did. One was we realized it had to be bipartisan, bicameral, and we needed to make it inclusive. And Michigan is a big state to cover. So the nonprofit caucus is actually co-chaired by 4 members of the Senate and 4 members of the House. So we have 8 leaders. Getting the 8 of them together is a challenge at times. But the good news is they have embraced the idea of supporting a nonprofit agenda. The agenda is shaped by them. It's their agenda, but CMF and M&A inform it. The key thing we did, and this is what I've told others that we learned in Michigan the hard way, and really term limits was the wake-up call, and that was we realized that these people have very short memories, they have very short time frames, they're only there 6 years in the state house, And so they come in, and if they don't have a good grounding quickly, and one that they can relate to, you're in trouble. So one of the first things we did, and we now do this every other year, was we did an economic analysis of the impact, of the nonprofit sector. This was the first time in my history in Michigan that we'd ever done this. And we now update it every year. And the neat thing is we were able to show these legislators that the nonprofit sector in Michigan employs 1 of every 10 Michiganders. And that was a big wake up. That was like, oh, we didn't know people worked for nonprofits. Yes, people work for nonprofits. We're not all volunteers. People work for nonprofits. And a lot of jobs, in fact, the largest employer in the state of Michigan is a nonprofit. So being able to tell the economic story was really critical and helped give us the credibility we needed in forming the nonprofit caucus and having it as an ongoing policy-making group for us with the legislature. So those are kind of the 3 linchpins. We put the Nonprofit Council to the Office of the Attorney General in place first, followed up with the Office of the Foundation Liaison to the Governor, and then the third piece was the Nonprofit Caucus with the legislature. Well, certainly, and clearly this is where our larger members, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, the C.S. Mott Foundation, and the Kresge Foundation have played a strategically important role, because people will say, well, Rob, you're a membership association. Are you using membership dues to work outside of Michigan? And the answer is no, I'm not. CMF is really very blessed to have great support from our larger foundations who understand the value of having a strong philanthropic sector both in the U.S. and globally. They recognize that we're part of philanthropy is very much a global phenomenon right now. So we've had the benefit of having financial support to share and to help others benefit from the lessons that we've learned here in Michigan. So CMF, on my predecessor, Dottie Johnson, obviously was the leader in this, was very involved in forming the Forum of Regional Associations of Grant Makers, which is the national network. There are 34 regional associations covering all 50 states. And one of the most important things that we could do was lend our experience, our expertise where it was appropriate to really helping others form regional associations as well. So CMF has been very involved in that activity. The second thing we did, and I'll just comment on a couple of these if I may, but the second activity that we learned was that we could spend all of our energy working with Congress, but that if another state didn't have the same type of relationships that we did, or didn't understand the benefit of having those relationships, we could have some real challenges on our hands, because clearly, while Michigan's important, the chairs of some of these other key committees are governed by people from Montana, Iowa, and other states. So one of the things that we did, which was important, was we really put a lot of emphasis in 2 areas. One, into foundations on the Hill. I explained to you that we've been doing it for 32 years. We gave a lot of our energy and resource into really making it a national program co-led by the Council on Foundations and the Forum of Regional Associations. But related to that, and this is perhaps one of the more significant things we did, was the development of national standards for community foundations. We realized when we were developing community foundations in Michigan that one of the most important things that we had to do was make sure that the promise to the donor could be fulfilled, whether you were working with a community foundation in the Upper Peninsula, or in the thumb of Michigan, or in Detroit, or Grand Rapids, or wherever. And so we realized that we really had to take the lead in creating standards for every Michigan community foundation, which then became the basis for creating national standards. So we've donated staff, we've donated lessons learned, we've paid for visitors to come to Michigan, but we really played, and I must say one of the proudest moments for me was at the National Conference of the Council on Foundations in Atlanta, when it wasn't a Michigan announcement by any stretch of the imagination, but there was a national announcement actually with a common definition of what a community foundation is. It was the first time even though the field had been around, for a long time, and we're about to celebrate our 100th year of community foundations in 2014, we realized there wasn't a common definition. And so that common definition was really strategically very important for our effort at putting everyone on the same, playing field in terms of what a community foundation is across the US. And that helped us globally as well when we started to respond to requests that we had from folks all over the world in terms of how do you develop this thing called a community foundation, So part of our work has been supported by our big foundations. Part of our work has been simply just giving it away. The other thing, though, that I just want to mention that has been really important, and Kathy, you've been a major leader in this, and not to call you out, but in that has been the development of youth philanthropy, because it's really easy for us adults to be hemmed in by certain boundaries, but when you put young people in touch with each other from around the world, it's like magic. And I remember when we took 8 young people to a youth philanthropy effort in Northern Ireland, and we had 8 Michiganders, and they were working with youth from the United Kingdom, from England, Scotland, and Ireland, as well as Bosnia and Serbia. And that really was critical towards getting the youth bank movement underway, which has now gone global and works with not only high school youth, but college-age youth as well. And it was, if we had had a group of adults do it, we'd still be talking about it, quite frankly. I mean, those young people were able to cut to the opportunity. They saw what they could do together. And it was a great experience for our young people from Michigan to do service work and philanthropy work in Derry in Northern Ireland, and realize that at midnight, half the town became out of bounds. The youth philanthropy movement now in Michigan is 21 years old. So we have young people who are now through high school, through college, and are now out working in their professional career. And I went to the International Chocolate Show in New York, and there was one particular vendor there who I introduced myself to, and I said, "Hi, I'm from Michigan." And the young lady said, "I'm from Michigan too." And I said, "Well, this is very exciting. Tell me about your business." And she said, "Well, I just returned from working for McKinsey in London for the last 5 years, and I got my MBA at Harvard. And I decided after working at McKinsey in London that I wanted to set up a socially responsible business and give back. And I've always liked chocolate, so I've created my own company, and I've got a partnership with a cooperative in Ecuador, and I help support them." And I said, "That's fabulous. So did you learn how to do that from McKinsey?" And she said, "Oh, no. She said, "I learned how to do that when I was a high school youth grant maker in Bay City, Michigan." And so it turned out that she was one of our alums, and I run into alums of our youth philanthropy movement all over the place. It's really incredibly exciting, And the other thing, and I'll just tell you one other quick story. I took one young man who was a youth philanthropist, still in high school, to help me with a program in Los Angeles. And he apologized, and he said, "I want you to know that, I probably won't be going into your field, Rob. I'm really excited about being a chemical engineer." And I said, "Well, you can be a philanthropic chemical engineer." And so sure enough, I got a card from his grandmother who announced to me that with his first stipend, he had just completed his PhD at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And with his first stipend as a chemical engineer, he created a scholarship in honor of his grandparents at his community foundation here in Michigan. And so he was indeed following up and being a philanthropic chemical engineer, And there are other stories. I mean, I think the thing that's important, though, about the youth philanthropy movement, and this is one that, we strive, our young people who run the youth philanthropy movement in Michigan for CMF and with the community foundation strive to do this, is make sure that all young people realize that they can be philanthropic, they can be philanthropists. And in working in Traverse City, when I was running Rotary Charities of Traverse City and started the Community Foundation for the Grand Traverse region, I had a probate judge who I worked closely with in Antrim County. And I'll never forget, when, he talked with a group of his adjudicated kids, and they said, we should be involved in this. And so we had a youth committee in Antrim County that was 50% adjudicated kids and 50% other regular kids who really weren't quite comfortable in dealing with kids who'd gone through the court system. We had a couple of teenage moms, single parent moms involved. And the most important thing about that was one young man who announced to me after 2 years of being in the program, he said, he said, you have given me a reason to be part of society by being a philanthropist. He said, I can tell you, that I was headed I was headed in the wrong direction until the judge said, this is a program that the judge was very pleasant about it, but he was quite clear. You participate in this program, and it was always that that left the kids wondering, okay, I better participate. But this young man participated and became a very successful member of society, runs a small business in Antrim County, and I see him periodically, and he reminds me that, it was that experience that really helped get him headed in the right direction. Well, that's a great question, and I'm often asked that question, and I have visitors that come to the Council of Michigan Foundations from all over the world. They don't come to visit the Council of Michigan Foundations. They come to find out what is it about this philanthropic spirit in America that really makes society work. And clearly, I think one of the things that makes Michigan somewhat unique is the infrastructure we've invested in. And obviously the newest critical piece of the infrastructure, in addition to CMF and M&A, is the Johnson Center at Grand Valley. And part of it is helping them understand the value of having this infrastructure which supports, let's face it, without this infrastructure, we wouldn't have youth philanthropy, we wouldn't have learning to give, we wouldn't have some of these other pieces we've been talking about. So part of it is helping them understand the value of investing in a philanthropic infrastructure for the nonprofit sector. I think that's a critical piece of the puzzle. I think the second piece is recognizing a sense of community. And I learned this when I was doing some work helping one of our members in Eastern Europe, in the Czech Republic. And I was working with a group of individuals in the Czech Republic, and they said to me, Rob, you don't quite understand. We don't actually have the word community in our vocabulary. So what do we call these things if our people don't know what a community is, And so we recognize, and that gave me, some really careful insight in figuring out how we talk about this and how we help others understand that they can make it part of their world. So last week, for example, I had 2 days with the head of the Russia Donors Forum, which was a wonderful experience. And 10 years ago, if you had asked anybody, can we be growing philanthropy in Russia, they would have said, not a chance. But it was all about creating an infrastructure and creating a safe place where people with different viewpoints could come together. And that, I think, has been one of the benefits of having CMF and M&A, is we've been able to create a safe place for people with different viewpoints. And I can tell you that there are times when not all of our members agree. As you know, when CMF was asked by several of our members to take on the issue of HIV/AIDS in the early 90s, it was like, oh my gracious, you want us to do what, But the idea was we created a safe place for members to come together, learn from each other, share stories, at times disagree, and opt out of a partnership, which is fine. But creating that safe place, I think, was very, very important. And also getting them to learn from each other. I mean, quite frankly, one of the reasons why I think we've been successful is we've allowed members to really learn from each other, because they're all very busy, but we create that opportunity for them. And we just, we have one coming up later this month. We're one of the few places in the country that does an intergenerational family foundation retreat. Well, the first 5 of those we did, Kathy. People kept saying to me, Rob, this is a bunch of old people talking to each other about their family foundations and the problems they're having with their kids. You got to get a little more creative than this, Rob. So we said, okay, we'll invite the kids. And so we invited the kids, and of course that meant that the grandkids came too. And it was like magic. All of a sudden we had the multi-generations, all 3 generations working together. The young kids were doing their own youth philanthropy while the parents and grandparents were learning together. It was like magic, So part of it is creating those places where people can network, can learn from each other, that makes it unique. I don't know that it's in the water, although let me just say this. We're very blessed to have a lot of water surrounding us, and we're very grateful for that.
Well, and you took good care of it with a joint venture, right?
Indeed. That was one of the projects that yes, the Great Lakes Community Foundation Environmental Collaborative was a remarkable experience and a good lesson learned in generational philanthropy, because we had the older generation, and I'm talking about the 70-somethings and the 80-somethings, who were saying to me, Rob, the trees in Michigan are very green, the water's blue, Michigan's never looked better. Why do you need us to be dealing with the environment, Aha, I'll never forget. It was their kids, the 30 and 40-somethings, who take their kids to the beach, who were experiencing the beach closings on Lake Michigan, who were saying, the community foundations ought to be involved in the environment. So we were successful in partnering with some of our private foundations, the Great Lakes Protection Fund, and we've now got at last count, we have 74 shoreline community foundations in the Great Lakes Basin, all doing environmental grant making from permanently endowed funds. And it was mainly because that younger generation told their parents, hey, this is an issue you ought to be concerned about, Granted, the trees are green and the water's blue, but there's some real environmental issues here you ought to be concerned about. Well, I think I've shared a number of key points, and you've asked some great questions. I mean, clearly one of the key issues is philanthropy needs to be a partner with government, and we need to be a partner with business. And clearly the partnerships that we've had, and we have a very active corporate group, corporate foundations, corporate giving programs group, have been instrumental in making Michigan stronger. I mean, there are countless examples through the years where we've been doing these public-private partnerships. So I think that's, clearly step one. I think step 2 that we've talked about is involving young people. I mean, making philanthropy truly a multi-generational experience is critical. The efforts that you led in helping us start learning to give, so that young people in the classroom have access to content and context. I mean, I'll never forget when those young people said, hey, you're teaching us to be grant makers, but no one's teaching us, why do we have nonprofits? Why do we have these things called foundations, So I think that's a second critical piece that we've got to do, because we cannot take it for granted any longer that people are learning how to be givers in their home environment. Our home environments are too chaotic, too disruptive. We've got to make sure that that infrastructure is in place. And then I think the third point is that we've got to recognize that philanthropy is best because it's diverse. We've got to celebrate diversity and inclusiveness and recognize that while there are great differences of opinion, differences of perspective, differences of viewpoint, everybody can make a difference.